Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Hewlin. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Ascent Geomatics Solutions. We want to thank you all for joining our webinar today. I am going to go through some quick introductions here, and then we'll go through our agenda for the day. It should be pretty short and sweet today. We're just going to be covering the topic of how to make some of the pipeline projects a little more efficient. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start moving through some quick introductions. Of course, I already introduced myself, Keith Hewlin, and then I'm joined by the esteemed and the very popular George Prian, who's our productions manager, and he's worked for years and years using this equipment. So George, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm proud to be a part of this webinar this afternoon, Keith.
All right.
And excited to get going.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's dive into our agenda for today. So we're really going to make this pretty simple. We're essentially, Ascent Geomatics Solutions, we're a survey firm, and so we've surveyed a lot of different types of projects in a lot of different industries, and so we can speak to this from experience. Surveying without BlueSky, which we're going to cover in the first half of this webinar, talking about what tools are used, what does that process look like, what challenges exist as a result, and then what are the negative business outcomes that occur as a result of using those tools in that process and having those challenges. So we'll kind of start with current status quo, and then we'll move into now what happens when you introduce BlueSky into your environment. Now what are the tools you're using? What does the process then look like? What benefits instead of challenges are you dealing with? And then what ultimately are the positive business outcomes that you're going to get as a result? So that's our agenda. And so we'll start, as I mentioned, with current status quo. So what we're going to talk about is how most of the companies, generally speaking, these are the sets of tools, these are the different processes they have, the challenges, and then the negative business outcomes. And so with that, George, you're the subject matter expert here. So tell us about, in most of the existing processes that survey companies are using, what types of tools are they using?
Yeah, Keith, in today's business, especially in survey and engineering, we are typically using a myriad of software, right? We're using AutoCAD to import points. We're using Carlson and TBC products to process those points. And even Excel and CSV files, those files and good tools, albeit don't have the quality assurance and the quality control applications that other software packages have. So they have their place in the market, but not used for survey validation and survey quality control.
Okay, great. So these are the tool sets that companies are using today, most of the survey firms today. Mm-hmm. And so what, when you use a certain set of tools, that's going to dictate a certain process, right? I mean, you can try and tweak that process and make it as efficient as you possibly can, but ultimately you're going to only be able to do so much. So what does that process look like? And by the way, I'm sure this slide demonstrates it well, but maybe you can explain a little more detail. Right?
Yeah, I love your slide. It's a lot of chaos, and that can definitely happen in your business process if you do not have a good quality assurance and survey validation process in place. Typically, and from a conventional point of view, we have survey crews that go out, and those could be multiple crews. It could be single crews. Then what happens is, as the data is being collected, it could be nightly, daily, weekly, depending on what your process is for importing that data into AutoCAD, CSV, spreadsheet, TBC, whatever the AutoCAD or process that you're using. What ends up happening is once that product and that information gets downloaded to your office, somebody in the office has to go through each record or each point to make sure it's correct if you don't have a quality assurance or quality control plan in place. So you can imagine what that can do. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort and manpower to do your quality control and your quality assurance. So once we get it into the office and it's being processed, we can then now import that information into AutoCAD or a design-based file, and give it to engineering for them to do their design, and then so on and so forth. What ends up happening though is if we are manually doing this process, we cannot find errors down the road. If we are relying on this information from a manual process, there could be potential huge errors and impact to an engineering design. So what that impact is, obviously more costs, timeline impacts, we're not hitting deadlines in time, et cetera, et cetera.
So when you talk about time, you mentioned that there's a lot of time that could be invested in this. Could you give me an example, just when you're looking at this amount of data? I mean, how many different points could we be looking at here? How much time could you be spending going through an Excel spreadsheet?
Absolutely, and it's a great point. When you are, especially in midstream, where we have a very lengthy pipeline projects, and we are shooting weld, pipe joints together, there could be thousands of weld points, right? And so you can imagine looking through thousands of weld points, and if your data is incorrect, you may or may not know it because you are having to look through so many records. If you had something in place that was going to check it for you, an automated checker, for instance, then you can pinpoint fields that may have not been populated, fields that may have been populated incorrectly, and et cetera, and et cetera. So you can imagine going through thousands of records with your eyes on the screen, looking through a lot of lines that could be very, very tedious.
Sure. Okay, so just like the tools will dictate the process, that process, regardless how you want to tweak it, with a certain tool set, you can only kind of tweak it so much, right? And
correct.
So just as we said that the tools will dictate the process is going to dictate some certain challenges as a result, right?
Absolutely.
What types of challenges are you going to have as a result of having that process?
A lot of manual tracking. So am I looking at documents and trying to correlate field book information, manufacturer's test report information to get and validate heat numbers, sizes. You have to look at other contractors' information like pothole companies, surface locate companies. So you can imagine having all these different documents that all that information has to be compiled into one spreadsheet or one CSV, so that information, when it gets imported into the AutoCAD file, so the guys doing the actual design, engineers, can do their jobs. So you can imagine having all those documentation. There's bound to be some errors in your manual tracking process. Manual searching as well. If you're having to go through and do control find in your CSV or spreadsheet, it could take a long period of time. Look at your field book, look at this point number, go back to your spreadsheet, go and find it. Is the information correct? You can imagine having to do that for a lot of records, even thousands of records. You're going to spend a lot of time doing that. Another thing that we typically could encounter or have seen is copy and pasting errors. Copying information from another spreadsheet that needs to go into that spreadsheet. Maybe it's a pipe tally that we're validating material. That information definitely needs to get into your spreadsheet. And if you're copying one field incorrectly, or maybe you scooted it over, or you cut it incorrectly and you paste it into your spreadsheet, you're going along your daily business and didn't find it. Later on, found out that there's a problem with your data loading or your data tools, or something wrong in the database that you're actually delivering to the client. So those manual errors, copy and pasting errors, are crucial. And how do we validate that? How do we have a quality control method over that and overseeing all that? That's a tedious process.
Yeah, and so obviously being manual in nature, it sounds like there's a lot of human involvement in this process. I mean, that's generally where if there's more if a process is more manual in nature, and humans are involved in that manual, then there's just inherent errors that are going to occur. Would you agree?
Absolutely, 100%.
And so, as we talk about some of these challenges, ultimately we got to look at what's the impact to the business. And in this case, obviously there could be some negative types of business outcomes with that type of process, those types of challenges. So maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more on what's the result then if you're experiencing those challenges as a survey company.
Yeah, you could inadvertently send data to a client that you may not have seen those errors. They could be on their side importing those into their systems, right? Their GIS systems. They have to do that for regulatory compliance. They may have found something. and then they send it back to you. If you're going back and forth in that manner, you can obviously see that there's an expanded scope there. The expanded timeline is also impacted. If we can't get that into the engineering, or the engineers are finding errors, obviously we're going back and forth. Our manual quality control, quality assurance can also take too much time. We're not hitting those deadlines. Engineers aren't able to hit their deadlines, or they have to go and tell their client they can't hit their deadlines because survey isn't hitting their deadlines. So it's also that ripple effect.
And so I'm going to guess none of the operators you've worked with have would appreciate having longer timelines, more cost, and just a general expanded scope.
No, they're always beating us up for the expanded scope and expanded timelines.
All right, fair enough. And so I threw this one in here just because, when you have these things as a survey company, you're already going to find this situation of, kind of looking at who do we blame for any of those things. Why is the project scope expanded? Why is the timeline expanded? Why are we having errors that's causing a ripple effect, as you said, to these other different groups? And that's why I thought this would be a relevant image to show here, because there is actually some truth to this, and this is what we, I guess, would try and avoid if possible, right?
Yep.
By using a different set of tools. So let's talk about some of those tools. So in your experience, you've worked with for survey firms that didn't have any of this, any of these tools we're getting ready to talk about. And obviously, some of what you just got done talking about is from personal experience, right? I mean,
correct.
You've actually gone through that. But you've also been now on the other side of it, where you've used BlueSky type of tools, and now you've seen a different type of process and some inherent benefits that result from that process. And now, instead of negative, we're talking about positive business outcomes. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. And I've been on both sides, engineering and surveying. So I understand the repercussion on the engineering side. When that survey data is coming in late, or it's coming in incorrect, I'm the one that has to fix it, right? I'm the data manager. I'm the one that has to fix it. I'm responsible for it. Or I'm the GIS analyst. I'm responsible for that information. And when it comes in incorrect, I've got to kick it back or fix it myself. Do I spend the time fixing it myself, or do I send it back to survey? Those are the challenges that we see. So if we can work hand in hand and have these tools validate while we're in the field into the office and have a very streamlined process, it's going to be a positive business outcome.
Great. Well, let's start talking about some of these tools then. So we're talking about BlueSky, of course, right? And obviously there's he's cheering already. And there's obviously a suite of solutions that BlueSky offers. We're going to talk about three in particular here: Dash, Rev, and Lightning. So maybe you could just kind of give us a high-level understanding of BlueSky for those of the folks that are not familiar. I know I actually communicated with a few people that I sent this invitation out to that are really not that familiar with BlueSky at all. So maybe you could start with just kind of a high level, who's BlueSky, and then high level some of these, and then we'll dig into a little more detail on them.
Yeah, absolutely. BlueSky Development Company has been around for almost 20 years. They service approximately 90% of the oil and gas industry as far as alignment sheet generation, data management, and now data and asset service applications. So with the alignment sheet generation, obviously we're talking about survey data and integrating that into our process and workflows.
And just for the record, because we are recording this, you're not a paid spokesperson for BlueSky, is that correct?
No, I am not a paid spokesperson.
But you are a big fan.
I am a big fan.
And because this really does provide some big benefits to any type of midstream.
Yeah, absolutely. We here at Ascent have these tools in-house, and we use them and are continually to use them regularly. But they work for us, and the way our business is set up, we are more efficient because of these tools. And
one other clarifying point, you said 90% of kind of oil and gas type companies, but what about water infrastructure, pipelines, other types other than oil and gas, but still talking about pipelines? Does everything we're getting ready to talk about still apply to all those?
Absolutely. Anything that involves a plan and a profile, water lines, sewer lines, storm drainage lines, telecommunication, anything that's linear that you have to have a plan view and a profile attached to it, you could use these tools.
Okay, very good. So let's dive into these, and first we'll start with Dash. So tell me about Dash, George.
Dash is an automated survey validation tool where we can not only from the field have our surveyors import information before and stage data before it even gets to the office. This is a huge advantage instead of the conventional method of doing a conventional survey, processing that survey, sending it in the office, and having them validate and manually check codes for correctness. So not only does it do that, but it's also a material validation tool that is compliant with regulatory documentation. You can attach it for any material, test reports, PHMSA reg documentation, permits, anything that you could think of that you would need to build, say, pipe tally or as-built information or plats or geotech information. You can link documents into your data.
Okay, great. So I think we have a little more here. So this is just a little more detail around Dash.
Yeah, another thing or another great tool that Dash uses, or its capability, is writing data to your spatial database. I can bring in my points and have them be validated, and that's great, but where does it go from there? It gets automatically pushed to your spatial database so that it's automatically built into the client schema for PODS deliverable. PODS deliverable is that geodatabase where operators are using to manage their assets.
Okay, great. And I think now we can kind of switch over and let's talk a little bit about Rev.
Yeah, and so Rev is basically that database that is triggering and pulling information from the spatial database. So if you think about it in terms of a workflow, Rev is your brainchild, and it's also comparing, data is being pushed into spatial database and to the Rev database. So you can not only do GIS applications, AutoCAD, you're sharing your data, and it's being collaborated through all your groups. So if you have GIS group, an AutoCAD group, or mapping groups, those groups can all share data and work together instead of separately. Okay. Typically in different environments without the BSD tools, you are doing things maybe at the same time or maybe not. GIS has deliverables for PODS, and AutoCAD has, or mapping groups have deliverables in alignment sheet generation. If those two data sets don't match, your data is going to not be good, and the operator will see it, and it will get kicked back to you.
And so in layman's terms here, for people like me, this is a one-stop shop, meaning that instead of having disparate tools and systems and all this stuff where data resides in multiple different areas, we're talking about all this data residing in one area, so that everything is consistent across the board when you're going to eventually create alignment sheets or whatever that might be.
Correct. We don't have multiple CSV files or multiple data files that mapping group is working with. We have one data set, and that data is being pushed into your database, and it's being pulled to create your alignment sheets and deliver the client schema.
Okay, great. And then I guess that takes us to Lightning as a kind of the third tool we're talking about here. So tell me about Lightning.
Yeah, Lightning is our fast, efficient alignment sheet generation tool. Once we get our data from the field, it's been validated, our material has been validated, we can then push that information right to the brainchild, the spatial database. Once that data is in there, all we now have to do is pull it through Lightning, which is a GIS-based application. It uses ARC info or an ARC Esri, an ARC map, all those Esri tools that you have at your capabilities or your fingers to produce very high-level maps, great-looking maps, exhibits, permits, a lot of different applications. This is more of a GIS-based tool. We also have the AutoCAD-based tool where we can still do the same thing. It's just in an AutoCAD version.
And so are you going to see a difference in the deliverables? I mean, when you look at, in the old process, as we talked about earlier in the webinar, versus using Lightning as an example, are you going to see a difference in the actual deliverables that the client's going to get?
Yeah, you will. Just the quality in the GIS application is much higher.
Okay.
You've got higher resolution imagery. You've got better automated tools, easement bands, different bands, material bands are easier to populate and automate. Your plan view is more automated. The text is clearer, it's cleaner. AutoCAD is just a little bit different, a little bit more manual work, a lot of drafting, a lot of editing, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Although they are very similar, one application is a lot faster and efficient than the other. So.
Okay. And so these are the tools. So just like we were talking earlier in the webinar about existing tools, now we're talking about these new sets of tools. Now, what type of a process do these types of tools create?
Yeah, so what you can see here on the screen is basically this streamlined process using these tools from field data. And you see that here on the left side, and that's our survey data from the field coming into the office, automated through Dash. That's being pushed through the brainchild there in Rev. From there, we can pull that information, or that we can push that information to your spatial database. And from there, we can pull that out of into AutoCAD, and we can do reporting from there. We can generate reports for the operator from there. We can push the pod's geodatabase scheme from our database directly into the client geodatabase very easily.
Okay. And so this is going to create some inherent benefits, I guess, is where you're going with this, right?
Yeah.
Instead of some challenges that exist in the older process, now we're going to have some benefits that exist here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what do those look like?
One being the auto validation, right? We start with Dash. You can now, instead of manually looking through those thousands of records, you can now pinpoint exactly what the client schema is. So if you have codes, for example, that have multiple required fields, you can do a very quick validation on that specific thing. If it's required, flag it. If there's no data in that field, flag it. If it's an alpha versus number field, flag it. If it's not populated, flag it. If the data doesn't match my MTR report, flag it. So there is that linking ability, especially we talked about that earlier. We can link a document, especially like very, very important stuff like manufacturer test reports. Make sure heat numbers are correct. We can link those documents now to Dash and make sure that our heat numbers from the survey data is matching our reports, or our MTR reports. And that is very, very important. When operators look at survey data, one of the first things they look at, do the heat numbers match up with our documentation? Because if that doesn't happen, you can't install it. It's a big, big deal. Some operators require 100% validation. That is huge, and that is a lot of extra effort. Mm-hmm. And if you can't provide that documentation or backup of what you did, you are going to have problems, right? The reporting. If I can report that to a designer, to a surveyor, hey, by the way, this is what we missed, right? Go back and fix it, or find out what happened, right? All the data is being stored in one location. It's in one database, so it's easy to report. Everybody has information. Everybody's sharing. Everybody's collaborating. We don't have the two different data sets, and you're doing something, I'm doing something, and we're not talking, right? That happens a lot. We're too busy. We're not talking. We're doing two different things. We're going two different directions. Now you don't have to worry about that. It's all collaborated. It's all being shared. Everybody has their information.
And then not being able to, not just having that duplication of those efforts, right? So.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. You might be doing one task and I'm doing a different task. And if I don't have these tools, we are duplicating efforts or changing things at different times. And
is it possible you could even be duplicating those efforts using different data, which might even
Absolutely.
Which might even be a whole different problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So this all makes sense, and I understand these benefits, and hopefully everybody on the webinar understands. I want to ask, though, very candidly, so what? So, okay, these are great. Auto validation's great. Reporting's great. Ultimately, what does that mean to an operator? Why would they care that a survey firm like us is using a tool like this? What is this going to do for them?
Yeah, obviously, when you just look straight up at it, the common things come out, right? Overall cost. We can offer, based on what we do, we can do it for less, right? We can do it quicker. We're going to have less errors. So our high quality of data or our deliverables are going to be at, with less errors. We are also going to be doing it faster, right? That's just a general high level stuff, right? But also, what are we gaining? We're gaining a really good piece of information that can be shared, that we can share with our operators, that we can share with engineering. We have online tools, right, associated with these tools. We can collaborate. They can go on and do real-time sharing. We can have you log on to our website, right, and you can look at the data. Oh, they generated this amount of data, right? And think about it too. If you're a surveyor and you're in the field and you can validate your data before it gets to the office, you are miles ahead, right? So there's a huge cost benefit there and a savings.
All right, so I got to ask this question. So quality goes up, the efficiency in the project goes up, the speed at which you're able to, execute on the project is better. The costs are lower. What's the catch?
The catch to the client? Hey, they get a high quality product.
That's not all right. I'll let you up there. It just sounds like it's a pretty good deal.
We don't charge extra for having these tools.
Okay.
Right. This is a benefit to the client and to their clients. If we are a sub to a contractor, this is a benefit to them. Right. This is a way for us to really set ourselves apart and say, hey, we are at the top of the level. We are here and doing and producing high-level deliverables.
Okay. So at this point, I want to just throw out to anybody that's on this webinar that if you look on the right-hand side, you probably see a box there where you can ask any questions. At this point would be a great time if you'd like to submit some questions. We'll be taking some questions at the end. And what we'll do is just a quick recap and then maybe some recommendations, and then we'll open it up for any questions that you may have. So again, on the right-hand side, that box, you should have a little triangle there that you can open up and submit your questions. So in review here, George, we're talking about ultimately a tool that takes away that human manual effort, right, and essentially automates it the way that technology and computers and all this is supposed to do, right? And so what we're doing is getting rid of all these different tools, disparate tools that folks are using, and combining it into one tool that's all working off of the same database. It's all working off of the same data. And it's providing some huge efficiencies. Is that a good way of kind of stating the difference between the tools?
Correct.
And the process here, so the differences we're talking about is going from obviously a kind of somewhat disjointed or convoluted process where there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of time that's invested in actually scrolling through thousands of lines of Excel, and now we're talking about going into a process that is automated, that is a lot smoother, and all works together. I mean, that's the whole point of using this different suite of solutions underneath BlueSky, right, is that they all work together well in the sandbox.
Absolutely.
Anything else you'd want to add to that? Or?
No, I think you hit all the key points, the collaboration, the automated tools, the working together, everything's connected. There isn't that duplicity, that one group is working and the other group is working, and they may have different deadlines, right? And they're working now together. Those groups are now together. They're using the same data set.
And so if we change the tools, we can not just slightly change, but fundamentally change our process, which then leads to taking these challenges that survey firms are used to using and really kind of turning those into benefits now, right? Now we don't have this manual process, it's automated. Now we don't have humans that have to, look at the screen at 2 a.m. through lines and lines of different codes. Now you've got a computer doing that, right, which should be able to do a better job of that. And you're not taking the human element out of this completely, right? I mean, you're still going to have a human involved, but we're just trying to take out all of those small little details that hopefully computers can pick up on. And ultimately, then we turn what would be possible negative business outcomes into positive business outcomes, right? We don't delay the project. We speed up the project. We don't increase in the scope, which increases the cost. We hopefully decrease the scope, and make the costs what they should be, what they were estimated at, if not possibly even a little bit lower because we're more efficient. So if that's all accurate, anything else you'd want to add to that?
No, I think you hit it right on the head.
So ultimately, if you don't change the tools, you're not going to have an impact on the business outcomes. I mean, the stuff in between is really just a result of the tools that you're actually using, right? Change the tools, you're going to get a different outcome.
Correct.
Great. So any recommendations that you would have just for any of the folks that are out there? And then we'll kind of jump into some questions here.
Recommendations? Find a way to provide a efficient quality control and quality assurance plan for your business.
Okay. Well said. Well, let's, at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions that are out there right now. We've had just a couple questions that have kind of trickled in here. So let me pull these up, and I will go ahead and start. Okay, so I've got a question here. I think you actually mentioned something about this earlier. How much more do you charge your clients because you use this new suite of software?
Yeah, like I said earlier, we don't charge our clients extra to run this software. This is a benefit to the client and as a subcontractor, to their clients as well. So we believe that delivering high quality deliverables from a production standpoint is one of our main goals.
So the hope here is by investing, which Ascent has obviously done by investing in this type of technology, it's our hope that we'll continue to get repeat business, and that obviously our clients will talk to other people and say, man, you got to use these guys. They use tools in, BlueSky is just one solution obviously we use internally here to make these projects more efficient, but hey, here's a team that uses that. So that's kind of the idea behind how we recoup that investment for what we spend on these things.
Absolutely, and we do currently get repeat business from our clients because of it.
Great. Another question here. Are there any operators that are using these BlueSky products?
That's a great question, and yes, there are a lot of operators that use the suite of BlueSky tools. It is very embarrassing when an operator comes back to you and gives you a report with all these highlighted fields with data missing from a dash report. That is very embarrassing. That is something you don't want, Keith.
I can imagine that. I can imagine that would be embarrassing. So good there. And then I just had. It looks like we just have one other question here. How many survey firms would you estimate are actually using these products? Now, obviously, that's a hard question to answer. I'm guessing, like, there's really no way to know, but I don't know. What's your best guess on that?
From my experience, there are a lot of survey firms that use some of these, one of them, or a combination of them. All I know is, based on my experience, and here at Ascent, we use all of these tools. We are in Spatial, we have GIS, and we have a host of tools that do quick alignment sheet generation. Okay.
So while we still have this recommendation slide up, I guess I have to throw in one last one, which is if you have an opportunity that you have a midstream project coming up, give us a shot and let us show you how these tools can actually benefit your project, and let us put our money where our mouth is. Huh? That sound good? Well, thanks, everybody. We really appreciate the time. And George, I want to thank you for the experience and expertise that you provide. I know you've used these solutions, and you believe in them, I know, very strongly. And we use them here internally at Ascent. I can speak from experience. I know we've had some really good success with them. So If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My information is here on the last slide. And otherwise, this concludes the webinar, and we thank everybody for joining. And George, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.